After a 6-year break, the very famous analyst Mary Meeker is back with her first trends report since 2019. And this time, it's entirely focused on, guess what? AI. All 365 pages of it. For those that are unfamiliar with Mary Meeker, she was one of the OG tech influencers in the 90s who was at Wall Street and an analyst who produced extensive reports on everything about the internet. It became the must-read document for anybody that's trying to understand where technology is heading. When she released her reports, they weren't just documents or slides. They were cultural moments that made everybody in the industry stop. Now, after a long 6 years of silence, she's back. In today's episode, I'm going to break down 3 of the main takeaways that explain why AI is different than any other technology trend that's ever come before it, taken from her 365-page report. And I'm going to give you an honest take about what I think this shows about the state of AI understanding today. This is In the Loop with Jack Horton. I hope you enjoy the show. Okay, so let's dig into today's episode. As I said, there's 365 pages released by Mary Meeker and her team. So I think there's 3 or 4 key things I want to discuss that really tells us about why AI is just so different than any other technology trend that's come before it. I think the first reason and the first theme, let's say, is speed. So that's come through really strongly in her report. And it's one of the key ways that AI differs from any past technology trend in history. She's explicitly drawn a lot of comparisons, of course, between previous platform shifts. So she's talked about Vincent Cerf's 1999 observation that a year in the internet business is like a whole dog year, and then noting that AI's pace is really just 10 times more extreme. Technology compounds and AI is building on everything that came before it. Now, in today's episode, we will go through a number of charts and stats that are in her report. There's 365 pages of it, and I picked out what I think is the most interesting. But if you're just listening on the audio version and you're wondering what some of these stats and charts pertain to, if you go to the Spotify video or the YouTube video, or even the article that's produced for every single episode, every single chart that's discussed will be included in that. So since 2010, one of the key stats she actually highlighted was that there's been a 260% annual growth rate in the use of data to train new AI models, and a 360% increase in computing power, which has led to an over 167% growth over the last 4 years alone in the number of AI models that have been produced, which, as you can imagine, is driving just unprecedented uptake across consumers and business. And the speed of this adoption across different technological eras tells us a very powerful story here, because the PC took 20 years to reach 50% adoption in US households. The desktop internet era took 12 years to reach 50% of people. The mobile took 6. But when it comes to the AI era, it's looking like it's been about 3 years to reach 50% of all households using it. So each cycle of new technology is roughly half the cycle of the previous one. And you can really understand this when we think about ChatGPT, which just recently passed 365 billion annual searches, which is 5.5 times, by the way, faster than Google reached 365 billion searches. Because if you're not using it yet, the search feature inside ChatGPT is just brilliant. And another theme that's consistent throughout the Mary Meeker report is that ChatGPT is just utterly dominant. The growth of that product has been unprecedented. It's currently the AI product to beat by a mile. You know, the report shows ChatGPT subscriber and revenue growth being just exponential. It's reached 800 million active users in the report and 20 million paid subscribers, and they're nearly hitting 4 billion revenue. And they've done that in just a few years. And what's really interesting about this growth rate and adoption in households and amongst ChatGPT and others is just the demographic usage, actually. That's why most users are aged 18 to 49. 20% of people, according to this report, are aged 65 and older and have claimed to have used ChatGPT at least once. So this isn't just a young person technology. You know, older generations are using this as a Google replacement, and younger people are almost treating this as a life advisor. We discussed this in a recent episode just a couple of weeks back, how ChatGPT's most popular use case now, and AI's popular use case, has actually become therapy. I, for one, use it as a life coach almost every single day, whether at work or at home. And when we think about the theme of speed, it's not just the speed of adoption, it's also retention. Because daily usage on just ChatGPT alone has grown from less than 10 minutes a day to 20 minutes a day in just the last 18 months. So what's happening is a fundamental change in the way we interact with technology. We're moving from clicking and typing to a conversational interface. And this shift could even drive people away from traditional platforms, so social media or Netflix or YouTube. And as I've said before, every one of these companies wants to be essentially the chatbot interface that rules them all. Because every single interface, as it becomes conversational, will connect to other conversational interfaces. So a person only has to use one platform to connect with many other platforms. And going further with this theme of speed in the report by Mary Meeker, when we talk about developers and as a proxy to show developer involvement and the number of people building in this AI world now, in the Google ecosystem, developer ecosystem that is, in the last 12 months has grown from 1.4 million developers to 7 million developers in just, as I said, a year. That's a 5x increase. Another area that the theme of speed applies to is also AI performance, which is just accelerating at breakneck speed. AI models are becoming so sophisticated that as of February this year, ChatGPT 4.5 are consistently fooling humans into thinking they're chatting with another human. Previously, the win rate for that test was over 70%. So 70% of the time, people would identify this as an AI system. And in parallel, the report also discusses the speed of investment as well. So the big 6 tech companies alone, so the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, have spent $212 billion in 2024 alone, which is up 63% year on year, which is far above any historical norm of spending. This brings us on to a very interesting point about AI that the report does a great job of showcasing, which is the reduction in inference costs and the speed of that reduction as well. So yes, people are spending more time on AI, companies are spending more on building AI, whilst at the same time, inference costs, so the cost to run a language model on servers, has dropped by 99% over the last 2 years. So what used to cost pounds or dollars now costs maybe pennies, and what costs pennies today might even cost a fraction of a penny in the future. To understand really the speed of this reduction, it took 80 years for the light bulb to become that cheap to use, versus a year for some AI models to achieve a similar cost reduction. This cost reduction is only going to democratize AI access further, which, as you can imagine, is only going to increase its usage and adoption, which will only increase the amount people will then spend on it. And another area of speed that the report highlighted was the adoption of this technology at an enterprise level. Because this isn't just a consumer technology trend that's trickled all the way up to enterprise. Everyone's been jumping in at once. The proportion of S&P 500 companies mentioning AI during their earning calls grew from 10% when ChatGPT was first released to now 50%. And a 2024 Morgan Stanley survey found that 75% of global CMOs were already running AI tests, with virtually everyone else planning to start within 12 months. And that was 2024. We're now a year ahead of that. Again, there's an element of this report, because it's 365 pages long and it's so extensive, it feels almost outdated. If you're listening to this podcast every single week, you'll know about the growth of adoption and usage in companies. You'll understand how fast things are really changing. Okay, so I'm now going to move on from that big theme of speed and all the data and the statistics around speed as well to something else that was becoming very apparent inside the report, which is that AI has been global from day one. And this is another real big way that it differs from any immediate or previous technology. Because previous technology trends started maybe in the US and slowly spread worldwide. You know, the internet took 23 years for 90% of users to be outside of North America. And with ChatGPT, that just took 3 years. The top country using ChatGPT now isn't the US, it's India, which represents 13.5% of total usage compared to the US's 8.9%. And crazily, after that comes Indonesia and Brazil, both with over 5%, followed by Egypt with nearly 4% of total usage. And as a result, it's been geopolitical from day one too. This isn't a technology that developed in a vacuum and then became geopolitically relevant. The US and China have been in this AI competition from day one. And the report highlights the fact that there is an arms race going on. And the reality, I quote, the reality is AI leadership could beget geopolitical leadership and not vice versa. Essentially, the nation or company that leads AI is going to have the strategic edge on the geopolitical stage. And the report backs this up by comparing progress across countries. For example, China is portrayed as surging ahead in certain areas. By 2025, China has released 3 major large-scale open source models, which is more than any other country. The Chinese language model DeepSeek, which we've discussed on this episode, went from 0 to 21% of global LLM users in literally just a few months, highlighting how quickly China is mobilizing that massive user base. And she also noted that the open source model produced by Alibaba called Qwen 2.5 is outperforming many Western models. And this battle really comes through in the data, because the total number of large-scale AI systems in both the US and China literally dwarfs the rest of the world. There is more large-scale AI systems deployed in both the US and China versus the entire rest of the world combined. But for China, they've got a huge advantage when it comes to embodied AI. So this is AI inside of robots. So China has more robots in industry installed than the rest of the world combined, with the US lagging, you could even say, embarrassingly far behind. The third major theme, I think, that shows that this technology is so different than any other technology before it is just the breadth of disruption. Mary Meeker isn't just saying things are changing faster, she's saying that everything is changing. In the report, it tried to predict loads of different areas that AI will make an impact, and to be honest, it talked about coding and research and logistics, which to me just felt outdated because I'm already seeing these systems deployed. We're also seeing new AI-first companies just grow at unprecedented rates, like Livable, who was featured in the report as growing their recurring revenue from pretty much 0 in 2024 to 50 million 6 months later. These aren't small improvements, these are exponential leaps. And throughout the report, really, Meeker highlights the fact that the competitive dynamics have never been like this before. For example, one chart showed autonomous vehicles taking over Lyft and even Uber in certain areas in the US. This isn't just this sci-fi experiment, it's the reality in San Francisco, in a real major city where driverless cars are becoming the go-to form of transport. So yeah, the breadth of disruption across every single industry is unprecedented. And when combined with the speed and the fact that this is so global, you can see why people are both excited and scared. But I thought I'd give an honest take on all of this. Looking at Meeker's very comprehensive report, I think she nails this macro 30,000 foot story. But I think there's a big gap between this 30,000 foot analysis and what's actually happening on the ground when it comes to trying to extract value from AI. So I'll try and walk you through some of the things that I see as disconnects. The capital deployment story, for example, is quite fascinating. Meeker documents big technology companies spending, $212 billion on AI in 2024 alone, which is just staggering by quite literally any measure. But when you actually follow the money trail, so where people are actually making money from AI, all the way back to the P&L impact, the results are very uneven. The wins are very real, but they're very specific rather than very broad. I did an entire episode recently on the types of AI features being released. So take Stripe's fraud detection system. They have this AI system that analyzes payment patterns and has helped jump their catch rates, the number of times they catch fraud, from 57% to 97% pretty much overnight. That's not a small improvement, that's a huge change, and that directly impacts the bottom line. And what's very noticeable about all the stories I've covered when it comes to AI features being released is they're B2B focused. And they're typically integrated into a very specific industry or customer workflow, and they're solving very particular problems with a very clear, measurable outcome. They aren't these general purpose consumer AI assistants trying to be everything to everyone. They're purpose built, they're designed to slot into existing processes and platforms where the value proposition is just obvious and quantifiable. And if we compare this to, say, consumer AI, 2 years after ChatGPT or 3 years after ChatGPT came out, what are we still left with? It's ChatGPT still, and ChatGPT Plus for those that want to pay $200 a month. Despite thousands of startups and billions being invested in these companies that said they're going to be the consumer application for everything, nobody's been that successful. They've really struggled to find this sustainable footing. Perplexity is probably one of the few that have done it. And I think this really explains, I guess, a broader issue with how people interpret AI capabilities. Every quarter there's this new big headline that this new language model achieves human level performance X or Y task. And the benchmark improvements are very impressive and they're genuine, they're real, and the models are getting so much better so quickly. But there's this huge gap between this benchmark result and real world business value or personal value that solves a real problem. Benchmarks are essentially tests with very, very clean data and very clear objectives. But businesses have very messy systems and legacy constraints and operational friction with annoying and frustrated people in the process that have to implement things. So if I make this a little bit clearer for programmers, if you're using this AI programming tool for a brand new product or this perfect code base that's very small with very little errors, these AI tools will do a great job and increase productivity, by 10 times probably. But use this tool on a multi-million line enterprise code base, it will struggle. The magic won't be as magical because that raw model power hits a bit of a wall. It will make mistakes. It can't identify all the dependencies. And you could repeat this example across almost all work domains. Feed one of these incredible language models a perfectly formatted PDF, and it will probably extract almost all the information perfectly. But hand it a folder of chaotic, messy documents with random file types and really poorly scanned images, and it will break down quite quickly. And the obsession with AI agents is another way this is illustrated perfectly. Google searches for AI agents, as highlighted in the report, has increased by 1,000% in early 2025. So obviously there's a clear vision of the future that people are having, and they see agents as key to that, and I do too. But this obsession with autonomous systems that can plan and reason and execute multi-step workflows without any oversight or involvement from a human is well into the future. Point one of these models at a business process and tell it to autonomously orchestrate and decide everything, it'll often not work. And it'll only really work in a very constrained and specific scenario. But for many use cases, I'd argue the most successful deployments will share a few critical characteristics. So the scope is quite tight. Second, the inputs are going to be quite predictable. So it might be a recording from conversations, or it could be a customer support conversation. And third, the risk of any mistakes by the agent or the AI is very well managed. So there's some form of human oversight or ability to audit and quickly change things. The moment you step outside any of this carefully constructed, comfort zones, agents are going to become exponentially more fragile because you're going to have complex memory that is remembering the correct things across many different interactions. You have to manage multi-tool orchestration. And despite lots of cool-looking videos, a production agent system still requires human operators. We call them AI managers, who can look at errors or look at the data and make improvements, sometimes at 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning to fix something that's just not working. So I guess what I'm saying is the data doesn't tell the whole story, because it's not just about technology curves or benchmarks. It's about the implementation specifics that makes the difference between cool looking videos and something that's reliable and used every single day. And for those that are already at technology companies or are builders or thinkers and innovators or business leaders, all I'd say is when AI capabilities are just becoming increasingly commoditized and competitive features are going to be replicated in maybe weeks, not even months or years, the only competitive advantage you've got is to move faster, have direct relationships with budget holders and decision makers, structure your contract renewal process really carefully, make it really difficult to switch from you, develop a brand that people love. And as you'll notice, these aren't magical AI, futuristic new things that have come into play. These are quite traditional business strategies. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. That was a bit of a chunky episode with lots of information and data. Please do share this to a friend in a Slack channel, a Microsoft Teams channel. Give it a share online. It's growing quite fast and it's all through word of mouth. So I'll see you next week.